Bioss Southern Africa is an independent South African-owned and managed company dedicated to assisting clients in the development and organization of their people and structures for sustainable viability. As a niche consultancy, Bioss achieves this through their ability to focus on finding realistic solutions to the challenges facing clients in the current turbulent, highly competitive and globalized business environment. Bioss's approach uses the matrix of working relationships as a starting point. This model, better known as levels of work, is recognized across the world as a sophisticated generic framework for organizational diagnostics and the management of interventions. It enables organizations to position or restructure themselves for sustained competitiveness. Levels of work is a flexible and well-proven model which has been used extensively in a remarkable range of organizations in terms of type, industry and size, ranging from a village council in remote Papua New Guinea to some of the most sophisticated multinational companies listed on the world's leading stock exchanges. Bioss builds capacity building in order to apply these methodologies and technologies through customized and in-depth training, as well as linking to our unique international network of people development expertise. Let's explore the basics of the matrix of working relationships.
Let me start with a small introduction about levels of work. Basically at Bioss we see work as a function of three very critical influences. First of all, the individual. Second of all, the organization, and thirdly, the environment in which these organizations exist. When work complexity, individual capability and performance come together, we like to refer to it as a condition of flow. This is when a person experiences a sense of flow. Now, what is flow? When the challenge of what there is to do or work complexity is in balance with what we feel capable of doing, or in other words, individual capability, we experience a sense of well-being and a flow of energy connects us to our work. A person in a state of flow thrives, they feel energized, decisions just happen, and time seems to pass so quickly. This is of course an ideal state, but work is not static, and when the balance between work and capability slips, individuals can become either underutilized or overextended. And these two places, as you may well know, are not pleasant places to be. When people are underutilized, they become bored, frustrated, and even anxious. These people don't perform. When people are overextended, they feel overwhelmed by what is expected of them, and they become worried, anxious, and perplexed. These conditions have consequences for the organization as well. Overextension leads to increased costs for the organization, where underutilization leads to waste. Bioss uses a conceptual framework, the matrix of working relationships, to describe organizational complexity. A few individuals have contributed to the conceptual framework that we use at Bioss today. These are John Isaacs, Wilfred Brown, Elliot Jacks, and Gillian Stamp. Domains is a very effective way to introduce the matrix of working relationships, better known as levels of work. The domains of work was conceptualized by Luke Hubecker and basically talks about three domains that overlap. The first domain refers to adding value for the present. The second domain refers to adding value for the future. And the third domain is the value systems domain. The fourth domain that surrounds this we refer to as the meaning domain. Let's look at these domains individually. The first domain, added value for the present, is responsible for what happens operationally in the organization, the quality, the service, and effective management. Here the theme of leadership is excellence, and the focus is on effectiveness, efficiencies, and profitability. Possible dilemmas that could arise in this domain of work are trade-offs between responsiveness to customer needs and the cost of resources. Productivity and optimal performance are therefore vital if work is to add value to customers or clients, shareholders, and employees' needs. The second domain of work, added value for the future, is responsible for creating the future of the organization, the strategic intent. the focus is on creating long-term viability and sustainability for the organization. And the theme of leadership here is hope. The third domain, the value systems domain, is about creating futures of generations to come. It's about adding value to humanity. The work is to create and sustain a shared future for people with diverse value systems. The theme of leadership here is tolerance. Here, stakeholders and employees should not only recognize differences, but show a willingness to work with those differences in a constructive and productive way. The fourth domain is the meaning domain. No matter whether you work in the added value for the present, the future, or the value systems domain, people derive meaning from work. Often when you ask people, what job would you really like to do if you inherited $5 million? People would then refer to the work where they would derive meaning. Then not everybody wants to be the MD, a director, the state president. People to choose work because they derive meaning from it. Let's unpack the construct of complexity. At Bioss, when we refer to complexity, we do not refer to difficulty or education or intelligence as most people would think. When we talk about complexity, we refer to the uncertainty in the environment, the time span, the stakeholders. With regard to time span, and here we define time span as the time that elapses before we know the outcomes of our decisions or actions. In the less complex jobs, for example the job of the bookkeeper, this is relatively soon. But for the CEO of the large multinational, this can be anything up to 5 or 10 years. In complex jobs, there are also fewer stakeholders. Work happens in a concrete environment, and one can rely on your detailed knowledge, skill and experience to do the work. Good examples of these are pilots, surgeons, radiologists, artisans, and administrative clerks. In more complex jobs, there are many and diverse stakeholders. The work is more abstract, and one has to rely predominantly on your own judgment and insights to make decisions when faced with unknowables. Good examples are leaders in strategic roles, CEOs of large multinationals, state presidents, and so on.
Let's recap on the levels of work model before we move on. Work is a function of 3 critical influences: leadership, the organization, and the environment. When work, performance, and leadership come together, a condition of flow exists. How an individual experiences work depends on the fit between the challenges of the work and the capabilities of that individual. When people are underutilized or overextended, performance and the entire organization suffers. The MWR, better known as levels of work, can be described according to the 4 domains presented by Hubeka. The meaning domain, added value for the present, added value for the future, and the value domain reaching into future generations. Work complexity increases from one domain to another. By complexity, we do not mean difficulty. We mean the increase in time between when judgment is levied to the time fruition of those judgments can be realized, based on dimensions of variables, abstractness, uncertainty, stakeholders, and the type of judgment used.